of Vendor, Professor Samadoda Fikeni, who is the chairperson of the Public Service Commission, senior officials from the government and public servants, senior officials from various organs of state, members of the academic community, and members of civil society, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the Minister for the Public Service and Administration, as well as the Department of Public Service and Administration, I would like to briefly welcome you. It's a special occasion as we gather here in terms of the celebration of the public service at the continental level, which is going to be taking place during this upcoming weekend. This is a build-up activity where the Department of Public Service is going to lead a delegation to Addis Ababa in terms of the continental celebration. So having gathered here, we would like to appreciate the partnership that we have with the tertiary institutions, and we would like to look forward to the public lecture that our advocate is going to be presenting. And we also welcome your participation in terms of the various stakeholders who are gathered here, including those that are joining us online, Public Service and Administration. We would like to welcome you as well as the department, which is the focal point in terms of the country coordination of these activities. So we look forward to the public lecture by Advocate Mujangu Kumbi, and we really looking forward to future celebrations of this day because it's an annual event. So the partnership that we have established, and we hope that this partnership is going to endure as we move forward in terms of our country's participation in continental activities. With those words, I would like to thank you and greet you once again. Sanibonani, good morning. Dumelang. Dumelang. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sokela. I was a little bit jealous when you said Dumelang and then they agreed. Because when I said Dumelang to them, they didn't agree with that oomph. But thank you very much for your remarks. Now we know that we are in a good partnership with the department itself, and knowing very well that you are representing the minister. When the minister is accusing us of something else, we'll say, Dr. Sokela said this on that day, therefore, we are going to hold you accountable. Thank you very much, Dr. Sokela. Colleagues, we are going to get a message of support from the University of Pretoria, Stellenbosch University, by Professor Gerda van Dijk. Prof. van Dijk, while you are coming with your grand march, give her a hand of applause.
Thank you, Program Director. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a hearty welcome to all the distinguished guests. As my colleague David, I stand on the protocols being observed, and it is my pleasure on behalf of the University of Pretoria to offer a message of support as we mark the 2025 Africa Public Service Day through this very important lecture. There is a powerful African proverb that says, on restorative justice specifically, that a child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And what does that mean in terms of restorative justice? It emphasizes that we have a community responsibility to nurture and include. It suggests that harm arises from neglect, exclusion, and broken relationships. And it says that restorative justice seeks to repair harm, restore relationships, and reintegrate rather than punish. So, this lecture today commemorates a very important day on the calendar of our continent, but it is also deeply meaningful to us within the African context. Africa Public Service Day serves as a powerful platform to honor the men and the women who dedicate themselves, often under challenging circumstances, to advance for the common good. These are individuals who form the backbone of our government and institutions, shaping the policies and services that directly impact millions of lives on this continent. At the University of Pretoria, we strongly believe in transformative power, in restorative justice, in making sure that we are contributing to building a capable, ethical, and citizen-centered public service. Our academic programs in public administration, governance, policy, law, they're all designed not only to train our professionals, but rather to cultivate leaders. Leaders who are attuned to the needs of our diverse societies, that commemorate the heritage from where we come, and are committed to upholding the values, the accountability, and the service excellence that we subscribe to. This year's theme challenges us to reimagine public service for a changing Africa. We are reminded that the future of our public institutions must be shaped not only by innovation, but also by giving a place and a space and creating the brave space for restorative justice to happen. We need the deep commitment to justice and equity. In a continent where the majority of our population is under the age of 25, and where technological change is accelerating rapidly, the public service must evolve, not only to keep peace, but to lead. As a university, we take seriously our responsibility to contribute to this evolution, and we do it through our research, and we're looking at governance and how to do governance differently. We have partnerships that strengthen the link between knowledge and practice, and we want our graduates to be exposed to the public sector, to public practice, so that we gather here to listen, to learn, and to exchange ideas. Because a public service does not exist in isolation. It thrives on dialogue with communities that it serves, with the institutions like universities that support it, and with the values that the society espouses. This public lecture is one such space, a space where we can critically engage with the challenges that we face and trying to think about the future that we wish to build together. I offer the University of Pretoria support for this important initiative. Let this day serve as both a celebration and a call to action to remind us that the public service must be rooted in integrity, driven by vision, and that it is one of the most powerful tools that we have for building a better, more just Africa. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to give you a message of support.
Thank you very much, Prof. Herda. Take home points from what she said. It is the whole question of not paying lip service, but engaging and rolling up our sleeves in order to make a better South Africa. Another take home point also, it is the question of the involvement of universities in this regard, in terms of governance and in terms of transformation and in terms of research. Therefore, universities should not isolate themselves from the public and be seen as white elephants or as ivory towers. And universities jointly should not speak in tongues, but collectively for the betterment of the country. Thank you very much, Professor Gerda. Now we are coming to the gist of the gist. But before coming to the gist of the gist, I would like to call again Professor David Melo to come and introduce our guest. And then when I met our guest this morning, and then I said, "Good morning, Mme." And somebody said, "It is not Mme, it is advocate." And then I said, in the Free State, Mme and Ndate supersedes your title. Over to you, Ndate.
Program Director, thank you very much. I have in front of me an abbreviated CV, but I also looked at my time. I realized that this abbreviated CV, if I read it word for word, it may be like I'm reading a speech before the speech. So I'll abbreviate what has already been abbreviated, give you a summary. He spoke about the gist, give you the gist. The main anchor of the lecture today has a BProc degree and went on to study for an LLB. The BProc was from the University of Limpopo. The LLB is from the University of Wits. She went further to do a certificate in trial advocacy at the University of Texas at Austin. In terms of the professional history, she became a candidate attorney between 1984 and 1986. So by then, some of us that we call ourselves professors, we're still at primary school. And during that time, she appeared in all courts on behalf of political activists in South Africa. She then went on to become an attorney between 1987 to 1991 as a go-getter. Again, she became an advocate from 1991 until present. And as an advocate, she appeared in all courts, served in government as a lawyer still, from 1994 to 2008. And then she continued to be on the role of advocate, though she chose not to make court appearances after leaving government in 2008. She became an attorney and a project officer for the Black Lawyers Association, and that she played the role of a national secretary general between 1989 to 1990. She then also became national director of the Black Lawyers Association between 1991 and 1993, and then became an executive member of the Women's National Coalition, then became the founding trustee for Women's Development Banking Trust. Her roles and responsibilities did not end there. She became the head of the Adjudication Secretariat, Independent Electoral Commission, South Africa, for the first democratic elections in South Africa between 1993 and 1994. She was responsible for setting up dispute resolution systems and resolving electoral disputes. She became the special advisor to the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa between 1994 to 1999. And I'm sure some of you may have seen her picture more at that particular point. She became a special advisor to the President of the Republic of South Africa between 1999 to 2008. Other responsibilities as well as the experiences that she had, as I'm trying to abbreviate what was already abbreviated, she also has vast experience in as far as the higher education sector is concerned. She is a past member of Council of the Institutions of Higher Learning, including Technican Vets, the University of Limpopo. She became an ombud of the University of Johannesburg between 2018 and 2019. And she's currently a proud chancellor of the University of Venda since 2020. But she does a lot of work with the multilateral organization as well. She became the principal negotiator at the 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995. And I'm sure it's also a very important conference in the history of the emancipation of women around the world. She became the principal negotiator at the subsequent CEDAW meetings until 2008. She became the principal negotiator at the World Trade Organization, in particular at the Seattle. And then she became the principal negotiator at the UN World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, Related Intolerance in Durban in 2001. And now you can see why we actually, as the organizers, we said this is the person who can really anchor this lecture. She became a principal negotiator at the UN World Summit Sustainable Development in Johannesburg in 2002. Principal negotiator again at the UN International Conference on Financing for Development Monetary in 2002. These roles didn't end there. She became the personal representative of the president in the G8 between 2005 to 2008. And then became the personal representative of the president again in the Progressive Government Network between 2005 and 2008, and then became the consultant to UNECA to support the high-level panel on illicit financial flows, a problem that we're still having, and then became the consultant to the African Union to support the work on the HLP IFF in 2022. She most importantly also played various roles in peace processes in different countries, notably among them the Democratic Republic of Congo between 1995 and 2008. She played a very crucial role in as far as the Kingdom of Lesotho from 1995 until present. In Iran, negotiations on nuclear disarmament from 2002 to 2008. She was also involved in the Palestine-Israel conflict. The Code of War from 1999 to 2010, she was also involved. The peace process in Zimbabwe from 1999 to 2020, and then the Sudan as well, between 2005 to 2008. In Liberia as well, she was assisting with the relocation of President Charles Taylor. Most importantly, she also had various government responsibilities. She was appointed as one of the 3-member presidential panel to investigate the causes of an attempted insurrection in South Africa in 2021. You will remember there was South Africa was almost stabilized. She was appointed as a board member and chairperson of the South African tourism between 2021 and 2022, appointed to chair a panel of investigating irregularities at the government printing works in South Africa between 2021 to 2022. She is also serving on a number of boards, company boards, and organizations that are giving people who are needy. So now you understand why we actually chased her and said, please come and give us this lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, join me as I welcome Advocate Mujanku Gumbi. So I'm using the 2 titles. Thank you very much. Welcome on stage and give us the lecture. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Most of that he got on the internet, and don't trust the internet, but brings back many memories. Well, I know you are not supposed to interfere with the flag, but I can't see the people this side. The flag is in the way. Organizers, is there anything that you can do without offending the government? Maybe here. Thank you. Thank you very much. I always want to see people's faces when I talk. Program Director, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we started off late, so let me stand on the protocol that has already been observed. And I must just say it's good to see Prof. Somadoda Fikeni after a while. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this discussion on this important matter, a matter where we interrogate how we clean up our festering wounds in order to allow for the healing to begin. I was asked this morning, I said to Professor Mello, I was asked to speak about restorative justice and reparatory justice, and other people will speak about the public service. I don't want to step on people's toes. I have titled this lecture, A Race Against Erasure. A race against erasure. Because I constantly ask myself, who am I really? Where do I come from? Is it true that I originate from West Africa or West Central Africa and came southward about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago? But what about the mysteries that were hidden deep within the caves in the cradle of humankind, which bear evidence that points us to the truth that we are standing where men originated? The oldest evidence found in those caves date back 3 million years ago or more. Evidence that now openly speaks about a community that lived, a community that loved, a community that bore children, a community that regulated itself. I asked myself, what language did they speak? What songs did they sing? What food did they eat? How did they bury their dead? What gods did they worship? What did they teach their children? The Olduvai Gorge in Ngorongoro in Tanzania tools over 2 million years ago. These are just but glimpses of who we are that come to light here and there. They come to light in the lost and found cities in the northern parts of South Africa and in Zimbabwe. The great Zimbabwe ruins tell us of a city that was a great trading post. Information that is currently available tells us that the city was inhabited from 1,000 years after death. That far back, that's when we existed in Zimbabwe. Archaeological findings such as those of the kingdom of Mapumbugwe, the ancient towns of Tulamela, Zata, where Africans were dancing the famous Domba dance to the beat of the holy drum, tell us a different story from what the plunderers of Africa want us to believe. Further afield, the Timbuktu manuscripts dating back to the 13th century stand as a testament to an outstanding African intellectual heritage. They cover a wide range of subjects, including medicine, astronomy, law, literature, philosophy, and other sciences. There are many questions outstanding still. What did we call our places of abode before the colonialists arrived? When the Batswana called their mother Ma, was it always the word they used? Is the word Ma borrowed from the Spanish, Italian, German word for mother? Or is it the other way around, that they borrowed from our ancient languages? My soul wanders, seeking answers. History, as we know, is at best partly documented, mostly written with bias, or not recorded at all. The African proverb that says, until the lion tells his side of the story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter, embodies this truth. As I have said, I've been asked to talk about reparatory justice in South Africa. I will try to go a little bit beyond South Africa because we are at a university and hosted by a number of universities, but mindful of the time constraints. I will inquire into this matter in 3 parts. First, address the question that is usually put forward when dealing with reparations. What is the harm that was visited upon us as people of color? What is that harm that seeks redress through reparatory justice? I will thereafter interrogate the responses that are under consideration by the African Union and the United Nations, as well as examples of reparations elsewhere. And lastly, I will explore other possible remedies that may assist us to redress the harm that was caused to us in a holistic manner. So we ask ourselves, what is the harm that was caused to us? It is not possible to discuss in one sitting the harm that was caused to nations by the many acts of dispossession, in particular through the transatlantic slave trade, who tell us that they did not take our land, but only put their markers on our land. Their markers, they use white stones and crosses to demarcate their territory. That, they tell us, does not amount to taking our land. The Portuguese were followed by the French, the British, the Dutch, as you know. And the Dutch tell us that 100 of their men landed in Cape Town in 3 ships on the 6th of April, 1652. Both the Dutch and the English proceeded to unleash a genocidal reign of terror on Africans as they moved from what they called the Cape into the interior of present-day South Africa. As they plundered and killed, they killed our names as well. Cape Town, Grahamstown, Port Elizabeth, Queenstown, Durban, Bloemfontein, Pretoria, Pietersburg, Nelspruit, Kimberley, they named our places, including bastardizing the ones that they attempted to keep, such as changing Mahiken to Mefking. In the process, we lost our personal names as well. Nelson, Oliver, Johannes, Elizabeth, Lillian, Charlotte, Victoria, Sarah, Jan, Peter became our new names. On their part, to date, although they claim some African ancestry, they have not adopted our names still. They erased our belief systems, calling us pagans. Our education systems vanished. Our way of life, our very identity were lost to us. The 100 Dutch men arrived without women partners and unleashed a grotesque attack on the sexual and reproductive integrity of indigenous populations. What is it that we want to repair? How do you repair the erasure of our identity? We lost our land, our names, our customs, our religion, our dress, our education systems, including the practice of oral history and storytelling, our legal systems, our whole being. That is the harm that we need to repair. And these colonial atrocities were spread throughout Africa and other parts of the world. The slave castles of Gorée in Senegal and the Gold Coast in Ghana bear the marks of the inhumanity of the slave trade. Human feces from these years form the smooth patina that you now walk upon in those castles. The narrow doors of no return remind us that there really was no return. Patrice Lumumba's only remaining body part, his tooth, has just recently been brought home to Congo. And thousands in the Congo had their limbs cut off. The National Museum of Ethnology in Lisbon, Portugal, has an ongoing exhibition titled Deconstructing Colonialism, Decolonizing the Imaginary. This exhibition shows the colonial atrocities of the Portuguese in Mozambique and their other colonies. Among the other documents on exhibition now, as we speak in Lisbon, there are records of how they classified blacks as primitive, incapable of rational thought, with no idea of statecraft, no advanced skills, believed in no religion, but were partial to spells, had no history. They said we have no history. And biologically, we resembled the great apes. The genocidal massacres of over 1 million Algerians, a third of the total population then, by the French colonialists, remain etched in our memory. This is the harm that we have to address. The horrors of the transatlantic slave trade have been written about quite extensively. How do we even begin to try and understand the harm caused by the brutality of the capture, the horrors of the transportation, chattel slavery, where the totality of humanity is wiped out and you become property, the brutality on the cotton fields, the rapes, both physical and spiritual, this mental, spiritual, and physical healing is immense. South Africa has a very limited direct reparatory justice history. The Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act provided for reparations of victims of apartheid. These reparations were limited to people who made statements or were referred to in the proceedings of the TRC and were formally recognized as victims, which in itself was a huge limitation because we know that every aspect of Black lives was negatively impacted by apartheid. The Reparations and Rehabilitation Committee was mandated to make recommendations for reparations, which reparations were not limited to monetary compensation. Fortunately for us, and we have representatives from the Department of Justice here, fortunately for us, the reparation process remains open, giving us an opportunity to learn from other experiences. South Africa, however, has complexities because the reparations program in South Africa is linked to apartheid. And those who were responsible and continue to benefit from apartheid are now inextricably interlinked and integrated into the current economic and political classes. In truth, some are part of our government. How do we ask for reparations against them? I have earlier spoken about the harm that was caused to South Africans long before the advent of apartheid. That part still awaits redress and is outstanding. This year, 2025, marks the 60th anniversary of the adoption of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. And the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination has taken up the responsibility of drafting a general recommendation that all member states should use in determining what reparatory justice measures are appropriate. I should mention that at the last sitting of the committee in April this year, South Africa, which had the honor to host the first United Nations conference against racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerances, had not made its submission. The committee is quite disappointed that South Africa has not made any submissions, I must say. Because the general recommendation that's going to come out of this committee will address reparations for all historical injustices, from the chattel enslavement of Africans, particularly the forced capture, transatlantic transport, the enslavement, and massive and continuing harm suffered by their descendants. Brazil made a very telling input at the sitting of the committee in April this year. They stated that the fight against racism, discrimination, xenophobia, and related forms of intolerance is a priority for Brazilian foreign policy. Not only does the Federative Republic of Brazil govern its international relations by repudiating racism, but it also considers the practice of racism to be an unbailable and imprescriptible crime. Brazil says that sustainable development, which includes the eradication of poverty in all its forms and dimensions, the fight against inequalities, the preservation of the planet, economic growth, and the promotion of social inclusion, in this sense, must not fail to consider aspects related to racial issues in its formulations. The United Nations Special Advisor on Africa, Christina Duarte, writes in May this year that reparations are often discussed exclusively in terms of the past: slavery, colonial exploitation, violent occupation, and cultural pillage. These were monumental crimes, and the demand for justice for these wrongs is not negotiable. However, focusing solely on history without interrogating today's systemic injustices misses a vital truth, she says. And that truth is that the past wrongs were not buried. They were transformed into today's economic and political systems. Close quote. As we've already heard, the AU this year adopted the theme Justice for Africans and People of African Descent through Reparations. The objectives of this declaration are set out in detail, and I have them in my lecture, but I will not go through all of them in detail. But they include strengthening AU frameworks, operationalizing reparations as a flagship project, developing an African common position, mainstreaming reparations into development policies, and so on. As is clear from the breadth of the objectives, the African Union has set itself a very detailed agenda, and I hope they keep to it. The decision to declare 2025 as such to be the year of reparations was preceded by a number of activities. One of them is the African Commission on Human and People's Rights meeting in Banjul in 2022, which affirmed that accountability and redress for legacies of the past, including enslavement, the trade and trafficking of enslaved Africans, colonialism, and racial segregation, is integral to combating systemic racism and to the advancement of the human rights of Africans and people of African descent. And the Commission, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, called on all member states, that includes South Africa, to establish a committee to consult, seek the truth, and conceptualize reparations from Africa's perspective, describe the harm occasioned by the tragedies of the past, establish a case for reparations, and pursue justice for trade and trafficking in enslaved Africans, colonialism, and colonial crimes. This is a decision of the African Commission. Another activity was an international conference that was held in Accra in November 2023, which also affirmed that the fulfillment of reparations is a moral as well as a legal imperative rooted in principles of justice, human rights, and human dignity. And the claim for reparations represent a concrete step towards remedying historical wrongs and fostering healing among the people of Africa and people of African descent. That conference is the one that influenced the African Union to declare 2025 as the year of reparations. Their decisions are also included in the talk, and I will leave them for now. Reparatory justice is not a new concept. It is a practice that has been and is an integral part of efforts at reparations for at least the last 3 centuries. First off were the French, who imposed racist reparations on the former slaves in Haiti as far back as 1885. One of the leading reporters of the National Public Radio in the US, Greg Rosalsky, puts it like this: Haiti is one of the poorest nations in the world, and rich countries have their fingerprints all over the nation's stunted development. The United States worked to isolate a newly independent Haiti during the early 19th century and violently occupied the island for 19 years in the early 20th century. While the US officially left Haiti in 1934, it continued to control Haiti's public finances until 1947, siphoning away around 40% of Haiti's national income to service debt repayments to the US and France. Much of this debt to France was the legacy of what the Virginia scholar Marlene Dowd calls the greatest highs in history. So reparations are known to nations. They forced the freed slaves of Haiti to pay reparations for freeing themselves from slavery. It is Marlene Dowd in her article titled All the Devils Are Here, how the visual history of the Haitian Revolution misrepresents Black suffering and death. Marlene Dowd in that article warns us to look out for narratives that portray Blacks as violent and whites as victims of that violence, when in fact Blacks were responding to the violence perpetrated against them over years. This lesson from Marlene Dowd is a lesson not lost on us as we observe the situation between Palestine and Israel. Reparations were paid also by many countries after both the First and the Second World Wars. One of the most comprehensive reparation programs was the one undertaken by Germany in respect of the Holocaust victims. There is a report that I've set out in full in my lecture by the United States Department of State, where they reported to the Congress in the US on the reparations to Holocaust victims. This report was released in 2020, July 2020. Most comprehensive. Just the Germany has taken commendable steps to confront its role as a perpetrator of the Holocaust and to ensure that Holocaust victims and their heirs receive restitution and or compensation. Germany also honors and remembers the victims of the Holocaust and has worked to cultivate a culture of remembrance. Its restitution measures range from compensating former owners and heirs for assets wrongfully seized during the Holocaust to making substantial financial contribution to victims' funds and survivors' pension. This is in 2020, just now. The United States is reporting on this program. They say from 1945 to 2018, the German government paid approximately 86.8 billion US dollars in restitution and compensation to Holocaust victims and their heirs. Germany has also identified Nazi-looted objects, including artworks, books, and objects within larger collections, and has returned 16,000 objects to survivors and their heirs over the last 20 years. The British Crown still has the diamond from right here in Pretoria, one of our biggest diamonds ever. Germany has returned over 16,000 objects to survivors and heirs of the Holocaust. Thousands more pieces of looted art are still missing worldwide. Rising anti-Semitism throughout Europe, including Germany, especially in the former East Germany, coupled with polls showing the need to increase Holocaust education among Germany's youth, highlight the importance of Germany's continued dedication to fostering a culture of remembrance. So, Germany has paid over 86.8 billion US dollars in reparations, and they have identified them in detail, what reparations have to be paid. There are many, many that are listed in this report, and I would urge you to read it. I'm not going to go through it, all of it, including American Jewish and cultural property archives that have been returned. The most detailed education, remembrance, research, memorial sites, all of that is known to people who talk about reparations. They know what needs to be done. And as I said, I'm happy that South Africa still has unfinished business arising from the TRC. There are even US citizens' claim against the German reparation fund. However, it is the same Germany that has just recently acknowledged that what it did in Namibia amounts to genocide. But it is again the same Germany that has refused to apologize and agree to reparations for its actions in Namibia. The same Germany that is continuing to this day to pay Holocaust victims. The monster of racism rears its head again. I have said I have titled this lecture, A Race Against Erasure. There are many who say that African countries should have now pulled themselves out of poverty. They refer to successes such as those in Singapore. I do not subscribe to this position. First, why should we forego what is rightfully ours? It is very easy for the beneficiaries of slavery, of colonialism, of apartheid to seek to put us on the defensive in order to deflect from what needs to be done. We must not allow that. Secondly, I do not subscribe to this because countries such as Singapore did not develop depending on their own capacities. The United States and its ally, in particular Israel, backed the development of Singapore with resources and political cover. Singapore is not a miracle. It is what happens when a major superpower determines that it is in its national security interest to develop certain countries. And that's what America does. It is true that there are instances where we could have done better in service to our communities. I realize that this lecture is co-hosted by the South African Department for Public Service and Administration. Many in this country are asking whether there is a public service to talk about in this country. We watch with dismay as many public services disintegrate around us. Not because we don't have budgets, not because we don't have funds, but because some of our leaders have decided that the public service is there to feed their stomachs. Some of our politicians and public servants are spitting on the graves of the young martyrs who died 49 years ago yesterday. Shame on all of you who continuously desecrate the memories of those gallant young heroes. It is of great concern that some of those on this corruption-feeding frenzy were in fact in the trenches with those who died. Have you no shame, really? But be that as it may, the demand for reparations is not a call for favors to be extended to the victims. It is about accountability. As we have seen with the Holocaust reparations and other forms of reparation, there are many ways of determining what kind of reparations are appropriate in respect of the different forms of harm caused. Cases such as Haiti present a relatively easy case because we can calculate what was paid. More recently, the American city of Tulsa in Oklahoma has been able to quantify the amount of reparations due to the descendants of the Tulsa massacre. You would not know, but I think some of you know that during the course of 18 terrible hours on May 31 and June 1, 1921, more than 1,000 homes and businesses were destroyed, while credible estimates of deaths range from 50 to 300 when the white KKK in the US descended on the black area in Tulsa. They murdered hundreds and hundreds of black residents and burned businesses and homes to the ground in an attack that was so racist and transcended mere mob violence. The city, now under a new mayor, is preparing to award its black community 105 million US dollars reparation to address the harms caused by this massacre. More than 100 years later, but better late than never. Also in the US, in 2021, Evanston in Illinois became the first US city to implement a reparation program specifically for Black residents who were affected by discriminatory housing policies. So the work that the AU and the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination is doing will hopefully add substantively to answering the questions: what kind of reparations will deal holistically with the harms caused to Africans? What kind of reparations will deal holistically with the harm caused to South Africans? My proposal is that in addition to all the excellent schools of thought around this matter, we should add a legal test that is called the but-for test. This test is used in law to determine whether the harm would have occurred but for the action of the offending party. If the harm would not have happened without their conduct, then that conduct is considered to be a cause of the cause of the harm. This test is fundamental in establishing liability in law. We know that these actions that I spoke about, slavery, colonialism, apartheid, disrupted African societies. But for the transatlantic slave trade, what would have happened in those countries from which able-bodied men and women were snatched away? We already know from what I said earlier that African societies were already quite advanced by the time of the slave trade. But the slave trade introduced a disruption in that advancement. No doubt those countries would have continued on that trajectory. As we know, we were trading with China from the findings in Mapumbugwe long before we were colonized. We were exploring the universe as evidenced by the Timbuktu manuscript. But for that disruption, where would we be? But for slaves, would the American economy have thrived as it did and does even now? I'm certain that we have accountants, economists, actuaries here that can calculate the growth of economies in the states, in the southern states in particular of America during that time, resulting from the free labor that they had. That can be quantified for purposes of reparations. But for the disruption by colonialism and apartheid here, but more colonialism, what would have happened to the great Zulu nation in South Africa? We know from snippets that Queen Nandi was an influential personality in the Zulu kingdom. But for that disruption of colonialism to our way of life, could we have inherited from her the understanding that men and women have equal standing in our communities? A practice that would have avoided our exposure to European Calvinistic practices that put men as better and higher being than women. Perhaps, but for colonialism, we would have avoided the scourge of gender-based violence because of what we saw and learned from Queen Nandi, what we saw and learned of Queen Nzinga in Angola, what we saw and learned with Queen Taitu in Ethiopia. But for colonialism, we would have avoided the individualistic approach immanent in Western societies, which results in the elevation of the individual above the group. This approach is a negation of our African way of life, which is encapsulated in sayings such as, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together with others. Our Ubuntu mantra, Umuntu, Gumuntu, Gabantu. That approach leans more to better accountability. It's not the individualistic approach immanent in these societies. These are just some of the thoughts about what could have happened but for the disruption brought upon us by colonialism. The question remains, what is to be done? I will leave the answer to that question to the scholars gathered in this hall. I will just suggest a few initiatives to start the debate going. First, we have to reclaim our identity. Archaeological and other findings have shown us that we come from greatness. Let us teach our children that truth. I spoke to a young South African, Marang, who's 17 years old and in grade 11, to check what we are teaching our children in history. It is woefully inadequate. It lacks context and does not go back far enough. Finds these policies such as Bantu education in the group areas is alongside the Sharpeville massacre without any context. We need to put up a greater attempt to teach our young ones the real history of this country. Secondly, we have to tell the truth of what happened. Facts matter. The killings, the grotesque rapes, the torture, all of it. We must tell that in order to confront false narratives about our history. Then we must not hesitate to claim monetary compensation for what happened to us. It is our right. Slavery was not only a legal construct, it was also an economic one. We must also involve those who are guardians of our souls and minds, the artists, the psychologists, the faith practitioners, to guide us on how we heal the souls of our nation. We must, of course, demand the return of all that was stolen, including human remains. And then we must fight the narrative that says that harm belongs to the past because we live with its continuing effects. And then finally, I suggest that we have to call out the willingness of some countries to pay reparations to white victims and their refusal to pay African victims. We must call that out for what it is, racism. In conclusion, some may try to run away from the truth, but the demand for reparations is not going to stop. It is a demand whose time has come. The Martinique poet, writer, and artist Edward Glissant, in his opening speech for the 6th International Literature Festival in Berlin on September 5, 2006, says, and I quote, "No place in the world can condone the slightest forgetting of a crime, the slightest shadow cast. We ask that the ban on the unsaid of our histories should be lifted in order that we may enter all together and all freed into the whole world." I thank you. I can go back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Advocate Mojanku Kumbi. It is food for thought. especially for some of us who are dealing with these young minds in giving direction to what happened, and then in also discussing what should be done in terms of reparations, race against erasure. We need to address the historical wrongs in order to understand the future and where we are heading to as a country. The whole question of land dispossession, it is going to haunt us forever unless it is addressed as of yesterday. The whole question of losing identity, it is going to haunt us forever unless we take a conscious decision as South Africans to address these challenges. You get a parent becoming so happy when you ask a little girl of 8 years, what is your name? And then a little girl saying, I'm Dino. And then you say, write for me, Dino. A little girl writes Dineo. And then the parent will say, hey, ngwanaka, onsa English ka dinko, but hansi Sesotho ka dinko. And that is where we miss it. Our slavery names, some of us, we are ashamed. Because when you ask your parent, what does that mean? A parent will say, no, when I went to the Home Affairs to register you when you were born, they just didn't know how to spell your name and they just gave you this one and say, you are a butterfly from today. And those are the challenges that we have inherited in terms of identity. I wrote a piece of work published in a book last month on oral history, whereby I was arguing where I was working. A certain white professor said to me, there is nothing like oral history, because the professor wanted me to use what he terms the theoretical framework. I said, but there is no theoretical framework in oral history. In an understanding of oral history in an African context, not in your understanding of oral history. And that is what we are battling with. That whatever we wanted to do and we wanted to write, we want to position everything into the Western understanding of theory, not in our understanding of theory. But that piece was published. And I want to show that professor that there is no theoretical framework that I used there, because I refused to bottle myself into this identity of Western theoretical framework. IKS, somebody said there is nothing like indigenous knowledge system, but there is only knowledge. Knowledge is knowledge, not indigenous. But when it suits them, they'll prefix with something. When it does not suit them, then they don't want to prefix this. Therefore, we need to be conscious of these things as Africans. And this platform, I think it is important for us. May refer to the Korea Island in Senegal. When you go there, in that door of no return, whereby people were taken and shipped out of the country, of the continent as slaves, you get to understand that reparations is important. And today, we need to think about what we are here for, and then what is that we are going to do after this event. Because this event should not be a talk show, but it should also come up with some critical and introspective kind of debates that we are going to take forward. It was so baffling for me to go to Stanford University and get a whole shelf of Izimvo Zabantsundu. You don't get izimvo zabansundu in South Africa. We've got limited edition. Did they reach the US Stanford University while we are battling in South Africa? Therefore, if I want to write something about izimvo zabansundu, I should fly so many kilometers and miles to Stanford to refer to izimvo zabansundu. And those are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. Today, we are still looking for Sobukwe's voice. Each and every time when we come to Sobukwe's Day, we are saying, but where is Sobukwe's voice when Sobukwe was in court? You can go to UCLA in California. They've got so many tapes about the PAC, a lot of tapes about the PAC, but there is nothing about Sobukwe. There is no voice of Sobukwe. Therefore, I take a challenge as a historian that we need not to do our history as a by the way, but we need also to make sure that our history is elevated. Because if we don't elevate it, nobody will do us that favor. I am convinced, before calling the respondent, I am convinced that we need not to do small things the big way, but we need to do big things the small way. And we started from somewhere. Can I call the three respondents? I want to see them here. I've been occupying these coaches for the better part of the day. Can I call David Lichwalo to come and be elevated also on the stage? And Professor Somato Tafigeni, and then Advocate Opre Sidupan. Please, colleagues. Ntatele Chwalo, we are eagerly waiting for your response. And Ntatele Chwalo huletse location wa mona wa dablapa ha ba bang ba nyoloha ka mona yena o nka dablapa ke batho ba locationeng hantle o utlwisisa dablapa hore ke eng ha ba tlo senya nako. David Chwalo is from UNISA Tabombegi School, and Professor Somato Tafigeni, the Public Service Commission, and Advocate Sidupane from the Department of Justice. Colleagues, in that line, please respond. And then each has got 10 minutes to respond. You are responding. You are not starting another lecture. Please, over to you, colleagues. As in that order, Dateli Swalo, Prof. Figeni, and Advocate Sidupan. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director, or the Director of the program, as you called yourself. I want to thank you for inviting me to the podium. I want to also thank my leader, Professor Snukwan, for standing in for the principal and VC of this African University, UNISA. And thank you for your introductory remark. Let me also thank Dr. Sokela for standing in for the Honorable Minister of Public Service and Administration in this Republic and the government of the GNU. I'm not going to waste time in terms of issues of a protocol, but I would like to greet the lecturer for today. It's a privilege indeed to respond to this riveting lecture by one of the towers in our political struggle, Advocate Mujangu Gumbi. I'm going to be tempted to speak a lot more about her because it's someone that but she doesn't know this. Someone that I have known her since my teenage years, many, many moons ago at the University of the North. She was always in the presence of student activists and other political activists. And you can imagine what her presence does to me. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very, very emotional and painful moment for all of us if we dare think that we are Africans and Africans in Azania for that matter. So, Kiritwebala Koloch. Good morning. Habari za zibuhi wa Afrika. I was tempted to just stop after her presentation, because what do you do? What do you respond to? And program director, you said it nicely that in these instances we're not going to give our own, parallel presentations, and there's nothing to add there and nothing to subtract. Maybe if in the interest of time, maybe I can choose to sit down. Will that be okay with you? I have 10 minutes, thank you. So I just wanted to mention something here from what she has said. One, the issue of white supremacy. So you cannot talk about the issues of reparation in this anti-black world and forget the notion that everything that happens is around white supremacy. We can't talk about colonization, you can't talk about slavery, you can't talk about apartheid and forget the issue of white supremacy. And I'm very much glad that she was quite clear and focused. And the way in which she handled her presentation, dealing with this complex, sensitive, and painful matter, she handled it with maturity, great poise, calmness, and absolute clarity. She said everything that needed to be said whilst maintaining that calmness and clarity. For me, that is very, very important. One of the things that we need to be clear about, she mentioned about the distraction of being, and you cannot get into that space without acknowledging the issue of race. And I want to draw the attention of everyone to the contribution by Pixlika Sakaseme in his speech in 1906 when he said, "I am an African and I set my pride in my race." He was not shy. He was not talking about the non-things, non-race or rainbow or whatever. I set my pride in my race against a negative public opinion. That was in 1906. But then in that speech of regenerating Africa, he delves into the identity and rich history of Africans, that we know we have our own history, we have our own knowledge systems, we're a great people. That was Pixley Sakaseme. But what happens post 1994? This great giant is erased in a way, and in my view. So we need to be very, very clear when we talk about these issues of reparation, that issues of race are critical, are central. So the lecturer referred to the idea that colonial powers are keen to pay reparations for white people. The case of Germany as an example. It's a question of race. What is difficult about reparations paid to black people? There's something that maybe many people don't realize, that upon the so-called abolition of slavery in the US and Britain, do you know that the slave owners were paid huge sums of money for the loss of their property? And it's no wonder that Advocate Gumbi referred to the pathetic case in Haiti, where even the Haitians were forced to pay for their own freedom. So when it comes to white people, they don't play when it comes to their own interests. But we are complicit, which is a painful thing. We are complicit in the undermining of our own interests as black people. So looking at the reparation story in South Africa, it's a painful story. It boggles the mind as to why the period for reparation was only limited for between 1960 to 1994. And Advocate Gumbi made this point very, very clear to say, like, how do you, I'm trying to get into the minds of those who were dealing with this matter post 1994. How do you arrive at, we are going to only focus on atrocities committed by by white people against black people only between 1960 and 1994? So the answer lies somewhere, and I think it lies in the dark corners of negotiations, collusion, and scheming against your own people. How do you arrive at that? Even apartheid government only did not come in 1960. The National Party came in 1948. But that's not the story. Colonization and incursion of our being as black people happened far before then. And that point was captured by our lecturer this morning. But the question remains, why? But I have a point to say that during this reparation period, you must remember that around 2005 or so, the National Party was swallowed by the ANC. So, in other words, the National Party, the apartheid party, resided in the stomach of the ANC around that time. So, how do you expect this reparation story to be pro-black rather than this wishy-washy kind of situation that we have experienced, which is painful? But the other point that I want to indicate is that in this process, we have a situation where instead of paying according to what the recommendations of the TRs would have said, which are limited in any case, only a few people were paid. So the black government, the ANC government, which was responsible for the responding to the recommendations of the TRC, decided that from these recommendations, for one, what is the value of a black life? Because the TRC recommended that for individual reparations, an amount of between 130,000 or so should be paid per person. But then the ANC government, in response, decided that will pay you a once-off amount of only 30,000. once off. So what was the struggle about? What did the people die for in the struggle? These points were even raised. But I want to indicate that when you talk about reparations, it mustn't be limited to a transaction that will pay you off. It's a huge, expansive issue that needs to be addressed. And the response to that can be captured in the submission by Ngungi wa Thiong'o when he says that in response to this, we must remember. And when you remember, you go back to where you have been. So the lecturer talked about the issue of when you, legally speaking, when you respond to these issues, you look at what would have been the situation had this issue, let's say colonization or apartheid, never happened. For me, that is very, 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 very important. So remembering is about what has been dismembered. Our languages were dismembered, our history, our, our culture, our legal systems, and everything, including the names that she has indicated. So it's a broader issue than a transaction that seems to be happening with this process. By the way, the payments were closed around 2001 or so. But I'm happy that she raised the issue that this process still has a window of opportunity to be re-entertained. And I think with the kind of anger, we mustn't be afraid to be angry. With the kind of requisite anger, we need to respond to the challenge. And from this moment onwards, try the best we can to ensure that this process deals with the real issue of what has been lost since colonial times. But the danger of also restricting the period to 1960 to 1994 suggests indirectly that you are exonerating other colonizers. You are exonerating Britain, you are exonerating the Dutch, and so on and so on. So we are dealing with this. As I conclude, I want to indicate that post 1994, we have never become a post-apartheid society. We have just passed 1994 through the agreement and the constitution and things like that. However, we remain a post-apartheid South Africa in this post-1994 dispensation. But what is the problem? The constitution that we have, which has promoted race neutrality, race naivety, has meant that we cannot even talk about reparations in a true sense. Although the Act, the TRC Act, talks about, includes the issues of reparations in the three committees, what has been foregrounded by the state, by the government, has been the issue of reconciliation, not reparation. Although it is part of the mandate, the issue of reparations has not been really given the necessary profile that it deserves. That is why even the TRC was known as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and not the Truth and Reparations Commission. So that is the point. So therefore, I would propose that as we move forward towards the new phase of dealing with this issue, as our lecturer has suggested, we must start thinking around the TRC in the sense of the Truth and Reparation Commission rather than the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Because for me, reconciliation without justice, reconciliation without reparations, amounts to just cheap talk. So let us implement what our struggle has commanded us to do as the oppressed, the colonized, the vanquished, the invaded, the oppressed in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Program Director or Director of Programs, for the opportunity. To our main speaker, a sister of ours who have inspired us over the period. I recognize the Vice Chancellor of this great university, in absentia, of course, Professor Snogwane, ably representing her. I recognize the Minister, Ngosi Mzamo Buthelezi, and I recognize everyone present here in your various capacities, mindful of time. And it's also good to see the program director from so many years when we're establishing heritage institutions, from the National Heritage Council, the Freedom Park, and so forth, trying to conceptualize those. It's always very difficult to follow on such an extensive lecture, which was thought-provoking, very forthright. I'm tempted to say I've nothing to say, but I'll take my time to say so. And I'm also very happy to be back to an institution that was my home for 6 years. And back in 1985, I also registered sociology after all my lecturers in the Department of Political Studies were deported from the then University of Transkei. I had nowhere to go but to register with UNISA for 1 year. Where does one begin? And how do I even bring in the public service in this very important exercise? Maybe let me start with that aspect before coming to stitch it into the issue of reparation. The first one, I think, I commend the organizers to bring this partnership that we have, public sector, university practitioners together. Because given the scale of the problems that we have, we can no longer have the luxury where there is no meaningful dialogue between theory and practice, between knowledge and development. Those should be organic and natural. We saw this during the COVID-19 when universities were trying to come up with some of the vaccinations. We saw this at different times. It can no longer be that public funds would be spent on just, what do they call it, this theory where you just gaze up, or you're just chasing the next Senate for promotion and you have no impact. You say, I do it for a career rather than a calling. We have limited resources. The second one, I think it is better we coordinate our activities such that one role player knows what the other one is doing. I remember last time when the new VC of Stellenbosch, we met the following day. He said the previous day we were at UNISA. I wasn't even aware. And yet we are role players in the same space. I am part of the leadership of the African Association of Public Service Commissions, and also initiated the establishment of the SADC Forum of Public Service Commissions. But very often you find that one is organizing in this corner, and yet we meet all the time. So for greater impact, I think Africa can do better when one hand knows what the other hand is doing. Now, closer to the issues raised, I think the first thing that we should recognize is we should locate what our main speaker was saying within the context of your global power structures, hegemonic and counter-hegemonic struggles. How do those function? You remember Claudi, when he was at the Zondo Commission, he was asked how the state had captured him, the Guptas. He said, I was also trying to capture them. So sometimes it so happened that liberation movements set on a path sincerely thinking they are going to capture the system. The system also is on a path to capture them. So it is that struggle, sometimes well-meaning but lacking in the tools of analyzing the nature of power. Because power doesn't reside in parliament and the numbers you have. Something far more nuanced and far more complex. You could have 90% of electoral power and only have 10% of real power. So that's the first thing that we should start to appreciate. And the second one, it's not to indulge in the South African exceptionalism. What have other countries which have gone through the same struggles done, and why is this issue so much resilient or stubborn? Each time I'm in Canada, I always try to visit the Native Americans. In the US, the same thing. You see their bandstands there. It's always a casino next to them and alcohol outlets. The same pattern. And we forget that when apartheid was to be set up, some of our scientific institutions were sent to study Aborigines in Australia, natives in the Americas, to see how best to design a perfect system. So it was not by accident, it was by design. But most important, it's the scholars who led the charge. From anthropologists, sociologists, statisticians, who were assisting in the processes, the commissions to create homelands, the discoveries of Mapungubwe, which had to be hidden in the basement because they would be contrary to the narrative. So that in itself should be the context of how scholarship can be used and misused. Because it was not just the politicians alone. And some of you do not know that even Verwoerd was actually a scholar. And he had a PhD in psychology. And he had studied his PhD in Europe at the height of Nazism rising. And he was fascinated by the system. So we should connect those dots. But what do we do at the point of transition? We make one huge blunder. We thought we could transform the economy. We thought we could transform politics through electoral system, through economy itself, and we started in the universities downgrading humanities and social sciences, which are at the core of critical theory. As we're downgrading those, all other countries that are serious about their past were preserving. You land in Beijing, the first place they want to take you, the old city. They say 3,000 years ago, long before there was the West, we were here. Because they understand the importance of history. When Queen Elizabeth dies, you see for 2 weeks how the English have preserved their culture, sometimes amplify their culture, whilst they are asking everybody else to culturally disarm. And it is for that reason that in South Africa, we're a numeric majority, but a cultural minority. The language we speak, how we define public spaces, our heritage. I was in the Free State the other day, and I normally go to a heritage or museum. Went to the War Museum, one of the best kept Anglo-Boer War. You go to our own places, S.E.K. Mkai, you go to Nkandolo, Tambo Place, and so neglected. There's something in our psyche where we've been disarmed culturally. When people say, why South Africa is such a small economy, joined BRICS, I was in one meeting with the EU scholars. They raised that question. I said, no, you are misunderstanding this. If you go back to the history of our pre-colonial kingdoms, Mapungubwe, Monomotapa, we were already members of BRICS. This is merely a reunion because we're already trading. The reason you throw this history back in that form is the same way when tariffs were threatened against China, they said, will bring you to your knees. They just said something. They didn't go to press conferences or anything. They said, China has been here 3,000 years ago, and we will live to see another 3,000 years in future when there was no America. It's a powerful statement to say, I was here before. Try your luck, I will be here thereafter. And it's for that reason they said for BRICS, the theme should be the dialogue of civilizations. Because it realized that the reason we have the problem of climate, we have the geopolitical problems, we have the problems of migration, we have all these other problems of AI misuse at times, it's because we've not had a dialogue, we've had a monologue of civilization. If anybody were to ask Native Americans, how have you lived alongside your environment? Africans, how can we embrace Ubuntu and go take from different civilizations? You will begin to see the benefit where humanity will be humanized. But now, where do we bring in public service? Everything we wish to do is mainly by the state, the public policy makers. Even as we go to the national dialogue, the state ultimately will have to implement. But if you don't build a capable, ethical, developmental state, you won't go too far. More directly giving you examples on reparation, land restitution has failed dismally. Among other things, you could say the political will, but the weakness of the state. One claim, 20 years, nothing happening. One case, Minister Zogwana said, one white farmer said, I'm giving you this farm for 6 million. Officials said, no, we need to do the land evaluation. And after years, the land had not been transferred. The farmer said, no, the official said, now this land will only be sold for 60 something million from 6. Name changes, process we've been involved in. Department of Arts and Culture changes the names through the processes, but the implementing agents, Sandral and others, don't change the names. AXA doesn't change the name. Constitution says 11 official languages, but on the ground we only have 2 dominant languages. No implementation, even with the existing policies. Land claims, they say come up with research. Where does poor community come up with money for researchers and lawyers? When history is known. So those are some of the things as we go to the national dialogue. We should never make a mistake of saying we will do everything. You could have the best ideas, but if the state does not have the capacity and the orientation part.
I hope I'm tall enough not to be hidden by the podium. Program Director Mekumbi, Ministerial Rep, University Representative. I think, let me just say, all protocol observed. And now it's afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone. Critically, I must say that when it comes to litigation processes, when you are said to be a respondent, it's either you admit or deny. But I've had my colleagues, both the 2 respondents, admit to everything, and I'm therefore following the same tune. Given the layout truly of the submissions that have been put forward by Mekumbi, and similarly when it comes to the recommendations that she put forward. Key to it is that Mekumbi said she's platforming this particular dialogue on what she deems to be race against erasure. Interestingly, and she intertwines that as a given fact to identity. And interestingly, I had conceptualized actually just a quote around the issue of identity. And I had said that the only heritage we have is our identity. When your identity is eroded, not even a mirror can depict the true self. In other words, the true yourself. So when your language is gone, when your artifacts are gone, your culture is gone, everything, as Mekumbi spoke to earlier on, when all those are eroded, then not even the mirror truly can reflect the true you. In other words, we do not even know ourselves because here and there we have only learned what we were told. Hence the question of our oral traditions not really being spread accordingly and taught to our persons and our youth, more especially, so as to try and inculcate this sense of self-knowing and identity. Importantly, just as a precursor, before we came here, Megumbi asked me as to why it is not the Department of Justice that is pre-leading, so to say, this particular discussion, lecture. And now I understood and understand as to why she posed that particular question to the Department of Justice, given some of the assertions that she made, which I will try and respond to as to what we have done as the department, where we have failed, and what it is that we ought to do going forward. So importantly, one, it's as well to look at the question of the facts being told as they are. Mekumbi talked about the aspect of that the facts matter, and it's truly the position as to what it is that we need to reflect on. And importantly, we as the Department of Justice have got the National Action Plan, which is meant to combat racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, as well as related intolerances that Megumbi spoke to earlier on. And within that particular document, which really came in as a corollary from the Durban Declaration and Program of Action of 2001, which Megumbi spoke to, within that particular NAP is the outline of the fault lines that we need to deal with as a country, and which we have not dealt with as a country. And maybe I should just start with the latter submission by Prof. Fikeni when it comes to the aspect of languages. That is critically one of the key aspects that we are faced with as a country, which has been identified as one of those fault lines within the NAP when it comes to the issue of identity with respect to our languages. We have truly not gotten to the point of ensuring that we implement the Constitution to the latter. So it is very imperative that we truly reflect on that. Two, it's truly about the question of the psyche that you similarly talked about, Prof. Fikeni, when it comes to the aspect of decolonizing the mind, which is provided for in the NAP. Similarly, that's one of the aspects that we need to deal with, to say Black people seem to be an embodiment of inferiority. And these are the aspects that we truly need to reflect on as we move on to the question of demanding reparations, because it is within the psyche of a person that if you are not liberated mentally, it is truly going to be difficult to claim same. We look at the issue of land, as Dr. Fikeni once more spoke to it, and as well as Megumbi, the issue of land from a racial and gender perspective. These are key aspects that we truly need to reflect on and say, from a gender perspective, what is it that ought to be done in order to ensure that we claim this particular land when it comes to ensuring that more, especially women, because truly the hands are in our traditional leaders, who happen mainly to be of the opposite gender to that of women. So how do we deal with those particular aspects? The issues of related intolerances that Megumbi spoke to, aspect of culture, religion, and language, are very critical to the question of land. But then we need to ask ourselves a question, as given the delay that Prof. Fikeni talked about when it comes to land reform and so forth, who ought to really push for this particular reform? We've got our institutions, that our constitutional institutions that we created as well within the Constitution. They ought to be pushing and claiming for this particular reparation from a land reform from a reparations point of view. We look at the Sierra Rights Commission. I always talk about the issues of culture, religion, and language from a land perspective, they ought to be pushing accordingly. The South African Human Rights Commission, CGE, as I spoke about the question of land and of race and gender, the Commission for Gender Equality ought to be pushing when it comes to this particular aspect. So we truly need to reflect accordingly on that. The question from Mekumbi is, what is it that we ought to do? What approach do we need to take in order to ensure that there is reparation enough in that particular context? We know the impact that colonialism caused, issues related to the aspects of the economy itself, socio-cultural aspects that we know all about, to say how did our social being get disrupted by the colonial system. We look into the issue of resources. Mekumbi earlier on spoke about our diamonds and everything being elsewhere. How do we claim such back, even just internally? How do we look into all these particular aspects? You see, when we passed the new law on looking at it from a question of land reparations, if one could call it that, the law was passed last year, but automatically, and I'm saying automatically, in other words, given the response that we received from our own persons internally, in other words, our own white counterparts, who decided that no, we are not truly going to follow this particular law. Now land is being claimed from us and so forth. It is that true reflection that we need to start internally to raise this particular awareness, even amongst our own people, to say, how truly were we committed to the so-called reconciliation? Mr. Letsualo earlier on spoke about now wanting to change the TRC to truth and reparations. But I think we should still start with that reconciliation. What is it that we meant when we said we want to reconcile, and how committed were we as both races, black and white, when we said we want to reconcile, and when we said per our preamble, of the Constitution, that we want to heal the divisions of the past. How did we think we are going to heal those divisions if we were truly not going to have any form of reform? So those are the particular issues that we need to truly reflect on. Our guest speaker as well spoke about a very critical aspect of the process remaining open when it comes to the TRC. And I must hasten just to put it forward that our new minister, Kubai, is truly so steadfast when it comes to trying to speed the process, when it comes to all these aspects related to the TRC, and more especially in passing our secondary legislation, the regulations that have not been put in place, for argument's sake, for example, the human settlement or housing regulations. I know for sure that our branch legislative development, it is at its final stages when it comes to drafting these particular regulations. So truly, we are trying to push as the department, hence, whence actually the arrival of our new minister, Kubai. And importantly as well, Mekumbi spoke about the third submissions when it comes to us having to make submissions to the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the United Nations Committee, that as the state we haven't done so when it comes to the measures that we are taking from a reparatory point of view. And that is something that one has to go back and put forward to the principals to say we need to now speed up the process. But importantly, I know that we will be as well preparing our report on reparations and racial healing to the African Union, which our international Legal Affairs is dealing with, together, of course, with our section Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So those are the processes that we are following at this particular juncture. So in a nutshell, I suppose, Mekumbi, you've truly covered the spectrum when it comes to the harm that was caused to us, be it from a socio-political, cultural point of view, be it from an economic point of view. I always talk about the issue of economic racism. If we are not going to reflect truthfully around the issue of economic racism and to say how do we redress that, then we are certainly not going anywhere within that context of reparations. And similarly, you spoke about the issue of corruption in the country, which one could say, read it as a form of sabotage, be it from an economic perspective, it becomes economic sabotage, or as well as from a liberation point of view, because when our people are not liberated because of the sabotage that we are causing unto them, given the lack of implementation of our constitution, our primary legislation, as well as secondary legislation, then truly, even when it comes to us pushing those who are supposed to reparate us, or from whom we are supposed to recoup, it becomes a little bit difficult because they too are observing how we are carrying ourselves, especially when it comes to truly giving meaning to our constitutional imperatives. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much to the three respondents. Can we give them again a round of applause? I've been indicating to three of them saying 2 minutes, and then they thought that I was saying Kaiser Chiefs, and they ignored me. And I understand why, because the tablecloths are for Orlando Pirates, black and white. And then I observed when I came in here that, hey, but the venue is not that conducive for me. The tablecloth is black and white, and I am on the other side. Then when I said it to them like this, they just ignored me. They consciously knew that I was saying Kaiser Chiefs is winning. Colleagues, I just want to make an appeal. I can see that almost each and every one who is in this hall has got a smartphone. I'm the only one who can see what is happening here. Everyone is glued on the phone. But when I look at the PR code and the people who have just registered, they are still 55. Therefore, I wonder what is happening. Because you've got the phones, but the registration is not picking up. Something is not right. Unless you are telling me that those phones are not good enough as the gadgets for registration. But you are holding on to them, surprisingly. Let us do the good thing, colleagues. Everybody who's going to queue for food will have to show that you registered. Colleagues, we are towards the end of the end and from the beginning of the end. And we've got colleagues who are, Prof. Mello, colleagues who are to give some people like myself presents. Can we have such colleagues coming forth? Ke tsela di present mono. Ha ka ke bona paperback e one je. Le nna ke ipadile mo. while they are still negotiating the question of declaration, remember you need to declare when you get a present. While they are still negotiating that, colleagues, oh, come here. I don't know how are you doing it. Are you doing it on the stage for the cameras or on the banner? Yes, and who is going to say what about the presents? Because I don't know who's getting what, but I think the big paper bag is for mine. Can you take the mic?
Megumbi, UNISA has this present for you and a book called Dark Matters. It's a book about South African Black scientists, I think. Yes. It says Dark Matters, a conversation with history, saluting the extraordinary humanitarian endeavors of South African Black scientists. And we appreciate you. And thank you very much, ma'am.
Can Megumbi come and get it for a photo shoot, not for police file? And this is evidence that you were here, me.
It is just my honor to, on behalf of the University of Pretoria and the School of Public Management and Administration, offer small gifts to our respondents. These are just notebooks, nothing as elaborate as what was given to Advocate Gumbi, but a show of appreciation nonetheless. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. You can just. Oh, no, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, no, you're allowed to now to double up. Thank you very much, Mecheda, and I also got my bag, and I thought mine was going to come via a Bluetooth. I wouldn't mind because I know that one you can't declare. Colleagues, we have now come to almost the end of our program, and I would like to call on stage Dr. Patrick Sokela to do the vote of thanks, and I know that he is also going to thank me. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our program director. You have done a very good job, and I take note of the Kaiser Chiefs versus Orlando Pirates, but I've got no comment in terms of the results. Colleagues, we have come to the end of our public lecture, and I sincerely hope within the limits of your schedule, Advocate Gumbi, that we can have more of you in our subsequent celebrations, because the message that you have given is very substantive as far as the subject matter is concerned. So thank you very much. Let's give her another round of applause. To our host institution and our partnering institutions, I think the nature of the partnership, you can see the results that it produces. And I hope that our partnership can endure going forward, and that we can come up with some sort of public input to the restorative process that is taking place in the continent and the country. Out of this public lecture, we can come up with something that is going to take the process forward. So we take it beyond the question of celebration. Can I get your commitment on that? To our respondents as well, I really appreciate your input. You can see the value that you are adding in terms of the discussion. We really appreciate your input, in terms of the session. And let's give them a round of applause. And lastly, but not least, our audience that is joining us virtually, as well as the audience that is present here. If we can also appreciate the fact that they took their time to listen, we do appreciate another round of applause. Going forward, just to sum up, we're going to get together in terms of the TM School, University of Pretoria, Stellenbosch, and DPSA, and come up with the way forward that's going to ensure that when we meet at this time next year, we can give feedback. We can also give feedback to the continental celebration that is taking place this coming weekend. And then we can keep this discussion going because it's a long-term process. Our advocate was talking about 100 years, reparations that are happening after 100 years. So next year is like tomorrow in terms of us coming back to reflect in terms of the progress that we have made. So I'm making that commitment also on behalf of the partnering institutions that we're going to come up with something. So we do appreciate. To the public service at large, the state at large, those that will be getting reports, we thank them for giving DPSA the opportunity to lead this process because as Professor Somadoda Fikeni said, about the value of a capable, ethical, and developmental state. And also the challenges that are facing us, especially with regard to local government. We traveled to a town called Ebaqudusini, the old Vryheid. It is one of the towns that has collapsed and the potholes. So when I read this morning that there were what I saw in terms of the potholes and the state of, the municipality in that area. Our minister has been allocated that area in terms of the DDM, the District Management Development Model, has been allocated that area as a champion. So we went there over the weekend, uh, not over the weekend, from Thursday and Friday, we were there. So the state of the collapse is very shocking. So I felt very sad when I read the news about the passing of the supporters of the EFF. If my reporting was correct from what I was reading, because it typifies the state of the collapse of local government. So when the advocate was talking about, do we really have the public service? I was really not offended because I can see it with my own eyes every day. So meaning that the DPSA and the rest of the public service really has a challenge as far as these issues of service delivery are concerned. And I hope that we can take this discussion to those realities of the ground on the ground in terms of the collapse, so that it doesn't end here in terms of the challenges that we face as a country. Thank you very much. I can't say more than that. I hope that the lunch is ready. Can somebody confirm? Ready? And yeah, I'm then going to pass on to the program director. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ndate Sokela. And sometimes when you thank people, you don't get an opportunity of being thanked also. Now I'm taking this opportunity to thank you for having thanked these people who are in this room. I think that is also important. Colleagues, we are going to have a photo shoot for the panel members together with our guest. And I said to one group a week ago that lunch is ready and don't disappoint me in terms of that lunch. I took the whole night preparing this lunch for us today. Therefore, lunch is going to be served there, and then I guess we are going to use the very same tables to have our lunch. And on behalf of the organizers and also the institution, thank you very much, colleagues Nangomso. Thank you.